Today is November 5th, 2008. We're meeting today with Mr. Burl Huitt at his home in Greeley, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Burl, and thanks for participating in the project. Let's start out, if we could. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, a little bit about your family.
Well, my date of birth was November of 1919, and I was born 3 miles out of Colorado into Kansas.
Oh, is that right? Near where?
The old town of Weskan, Kansas.
Weston, Kansas?
Weskan.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about your family, brothers and sisters, what your folks did.
There was 5 children in my family, and there was 1 girl and 4 boys. And my sister and I are the only ones, and we're the 2 oldest, and we're the only ones left in our
Is that
family.
right? Yeah. What'd your father do for a living?
He, well, he did lots of things. We lived on a farm for part of the time, but then we moved to town, and we spent most of my time in Pierce, Colorado, north of here.
Okay.
And he became postmaster of the little town of Pierce, so he was a postmaster then for several years.
Okay. And you finished your schooling up in Pierce? Finished high school in Pierce?
Yes, high school. I went all through high school, all through school. Actually, I was in the 1st grade when we moved to Colorado. So.
Okay. And what did you do then after high school before you entered the service?
Well, after high school, I went to work just here and there, and I wanted to go to business school. So I couldn't afford to go to college. So I did save enough money my summer work to go to the Barnes Business School in Denver. So I went there for 6 months up until the holidays, and then we ran out of money, and I had to drop out of business school. So I never did get to go back to college or business school.
Do you remember where you were when you heard Pearl Harbor had been bombed?
Yes, we were out in California. I finally followed defense work, what they call defense work, and I was working at the aircraft factory in San Diego when that all happened. And later, after the Pearl Harbor thing, I found out that I didn't need 2 years of college to get into pilot training. So I went down to the recruiting office and said, "Is this true that I don't have to have 2 years of college?" And they said, "Yes, if you can pass our test." So I said, "I'll try." So I made an appointment and I took the test and passed it. So then they said, "Well, we'll call you probably in about 30 days. And I said, "That's fine. I'll work for 2 weeks and I'll go home for 2 weeks and I'll be ready to go off to war." I went down and worked by 2 weeks and gave notice at the aircraft factory. Came home for 2 weeks, and I didn't get called for months and months and months.
Oh, no.
I came home on Easter, and I didn't get called until February the next.
Oh no!
And it was nothing to do. You couldn't find a job because you might be called any day.
Right. Yeah.
And it was a miserable time. But finally I did get called, and I went into what they call the Aviation Cadet program. And
now you joined the Army Air Corps because you wanted to be a pilot? Is that the reason you chose that branch of service?
Yeah.
Okay.
And up until Pearl Harbor, you had to have 2 years of college. And then after Pearl Harbor, they dropped the rule to point where if you could pass their test,
Yeah, okay.
you could get in without 2 years of college. So as soon as I found out about that, I went down and asked for permission to take the test, and they were very nice to me. I took the test and passed it.
Yeah.
So they said, fine, you'll probably be called in about a month.
Yeah. Well, now where did you go off into cadet school then? Once you were called up?
Once I was called up, let's see, where did I? It's all in Texas.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, actually, it was San Antonio. That's where we were sent, but then we were sent out to primary training at out in West Texas, Fort Stockton, Texas, and then we went for intermediate school, which was a couple of months, to another place in Texas.
That's fair enough.
And then I graduated from and got my wings and so forth at Lubbock, Texas, where they had a school.
Now, how did you find the transition from civilian life into military life? Was that an easy thing for you, or?
Oh no, I had been out on my own for long enough that I could do whatever I wanted to, and you get into the cadets, and you didn't do anything without permission, and so, but I got along all right. Some of the guys had an awful time taking the rigid discipline that as part of the officer training, but I got along fine and didn't wash out in training, so finally became a pilot.
You got your wings. Were you trained for a specific airplane, or what were you trained to fly?
Well, when we got, they had primary and I forget what they called it, immediate. Anyway, 3 different classes or places. You went from one to the other. And so when I was in the second phase, well, I had decided I wanted to fly B-25s. That's a twin-engine little bomber. And so I told my instructor that's what I'd like to do. And so he sent me then to multi-engine advanced school instead of single-engine advanced school. Most guys my size were made fighter pilots, not bomber pilots. But anyway, he was very nice to me, and he had me sent to a multi-engine advanced training school, and that was at Lubbock.
Okay.
And then when I got through there, then it was off to war after that.
Well, now, how was that training? Had you ever flown before, been in an airplane before joining the service? Had you ever flown before, or that you could remember?
Yes, I'd never flown. I'd never had a hold of the stick.
Right, yeah.
Never had any lessons. I had flown, yeah.
Oh, okay, okay. And then now we're in Lubbock, and you graduated, and you said you're off to war. Can you walk us through that part of it? Where did you go from Lubbock then to?
Well, then I was then an officer and a gentleman and a pilot. So then they sent me. At that time, they were a big push before the D-Day. I didn't know that. Looking back on it, that obviously was what happened. So I had told my instructor in advanced school that I wanted to fly 2-engine bombers.
Right, yeah.
B-25. Well, when I get my orders, there, hallelujah, I'm sent to Salt Lake City for B-25 training. And so when I got to Salt Lake City and checked in, I saw some of my buddies that I'd been in advanced school with over at the place, and they were there for to go into bomber pods and bomber training. And so when I got over to the check-in place, the sergeant said, "Well, now you go right back over there." And I said, "No, Sergeant, I don't go over there. I saw those guys on the way in, and they're bomber. They're going to bomber school, and my orders say this." Actually, 4 engine bombers they were. So the sergeant looked up at me and he said, "Lieutenant, there isn't a B-25 in the 2nd Air Force, and you're in the 2nd Air Force, and you're not. We can't send you to a B-25 school." B-25s was 2 engine bombers,
Yeah.
and so I didn't go to B-25. I ended up going to being signed to well, I don't want to mess this up, but I didn't go then to any bomber training school. I became a co-pilot.
Huh.
Just like that. They said, "No, you." And so they said, that was in Salt Lake City, and then they loaded us all on a train and sent us, guess where? Pueblo.
Oh, really?
That's where they were training bomber crews. So I thought, how lucky can you get going close to home for the next 9 months or so?
Yeah.
And I sent my wife a telegram, meet me at, I knew Pueblo well enough to know the hotels and so forth.
So you were already married when you went off to,
Pardon?
you were already married when you went off to the service?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I sent a wire to my wife to meet me at such and such a hotel in Pueblo.
Huh.
And she did a little side story. I don't want to take your time.
Oh, no, please.
When I got there by train, we went right through Greeley, the piers. But anyway, I got to Pueblo, and as soon as I could get to a phone, well, I went in and called the hotel where I had told Elsie to go. And I called the hotel, and I said I'd like to speak to Elsie Hewitt. And he said, "Okay, fine." And so some gal comes on the phone, and I knew it wasn't Elsie. And so I thought some of the gals were getting together and pulling my leg. And so I talked to this gal, finally decided it was real. And she said, I said, I want to talk to Elsie Hewitt. She said, "I'm Elsie Hewitt." This is a crazy story, but it's true. And so anyway, we talked, and finally I decided she was telling me the truth. Nobody was pulling my leg. And so there was an Elsie Hewitt who had who was staying at the hotel.
Isn't that
where I was told Elsie to go. Crazy thing. And so when she came on the phone, I said, "This isn't Elsie Hewitt. That's not my wife." She says, "Certainly isn't." And then we talked a little bit, and she was a resident at the hotel.
Oh, okay.
She was living at the hotel and working. She told me at a drugstore, wasn't it? A drugstore, Elsie?
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, one of the little sidelights.
Isn't that something?
So then we sat there and waiting for orders to send us someplace. And here I am in Pueblo, and home was just up the road. but they're saying we got way too many crews here. We can't handle them. So somebody's going to have to go someplace else. And of course, I drew to go someplace else, so it's too close to home.
Yeah.
Anyway, after about I don't know, it was 3 or 4 weeks, we got orders came out, and we made up these crews in Salt Lake. So, and they had a training program in Pueblo.
Mm-hmm.
But when we got to Pueblo, they said we got twice as many crews as we got airplanes, so you have to wait. And so we ended up getting, you can't get any further to Massachusetts.
Oh.
Typical Army.
Yeah. Now, were you traveling by yourself, or you were already in a crew and your whole crew was traveling together? Or?
Well, no, they made up the crews in Salt Lake City,
Mm-hmm.
and then I got transferred to Pueblo. I thought that's where our crew was going to train, because they had a place in Pueblo.
Yeah.
And then when we got there, and they had too many crews, and so they said you have to wait, and then we ended up clear in Massachusetts.
Oh, jeez.
So Elsie and I had a buddy of mine who I went all the way through cadet training. His name was Hughes, H-U, and H-U-I.
Yeah.
So we were always together,
Right.
and became pretty good friends. And he lived in Webster Grove, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis. And so we were both down at Pueblo Station. Then when we get orders, we got to go clear to Massachusetts. And he and I decided to take our wives with us. So this is crazy, but you do crazy things when you're that age. We went out and said that we decided, well, we'll take our wives with us, but we'll drive. So we went out car shopping, and we bought a Studebaker, big old Studebaker. Back then, the Studebaker made a big car. We bought this big old Studebaker, and we was going to drive it to Massachusetts. And so we decided, well, we had quite a bit of time, and he lived in St. Louis, so he would take the car to St. Louis, and Elsie and I would take the train down to St. Louis, then we'd all drive on to Massachusetts. But we had a couple of weeks to do this thing. So, fine, we came back home, and he had the car and was going to drive to St. Louis, where he lived in the suburbs of St. Louis. Well, I get home and there's a telegram for me. The car broke down at Lyman, and I left it there at such and such a garage, and I'm home. So here's this car we bought. He was a nice guy, but he wasn't much of a mechanic or anything. So I called the guy down at Lyman about the car. I said, what's it? He said, there's nothing wrong with that car, that old Studebaker. He said, this is in good shape. Those guys were just driving it way too fast. If you stay down under the speed limit, which was 50 miles an hour then, it'll go forever. So he talked me into it. And so I called Don and told him that I was going to pick up the car and we'd drive to St. Louis. And so I picked up the car, and the guy said at the garage said, now, don't drive it over 50 miles an hour. Well, back in those days, you weren't supposed to anyway.
Yeah.
So he said those guys were just driving it too fast and so forth. So I said, well, I'll give it a try. And we drove that old Studebaker at 50 miles an hour, clear to Massachusetts. Picked him up in St. Louis, and we just on the run practically, and we drove straight through. The poor girls were exhausted, of course, but we drove straight through to Massachusetts.
Was that much of a problem? Was it because there was rationing and such? Then did you have any problem with rationing coupons?
No.
No. Okay.
We were able to get ration tickets because we had a car through the airport. So we had plenty of gas. Didn't have plenty of money, but we had enough, and we took off for Massachusetts, and that's where we had fly a bomber train.
Okay.
That's where all the crews got together.
Okay.
And we at Westover Field
in Western Mass.
And so that's where we had our crew training before we went overseas.
And did you finally get into a B-25 then, or what?
No, I never got out of that in 24.
Oh, you're in a 24?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was a co-pilot in a B-24.
And then how long were you in Massachusetts before you shipped overseas then?
Quite a while. There was crew training. That's what the whole thing was about. Get the crews together, and then they'd... so we were in Massachusetts, I think, about 3 months. And then we took off by the upper route.
So you flew a plane over. You didn't take a ship over. You flew a plane overseas.
When we got ready to go, there was a brand spanking shiny B-24 out there, and we thought, boy, we got a brand new airplane to go off to fight the war. And the rest of that story is that when we landed in England, actually in Scotland, one of the airfields, it was a United States Air Base by then. And the sergeant crawled on the plane and said, "Get all your gear, get all your personal gear out. We got to have this airplane." And here we thought we was going over with a brand new airplane to fight the war. Yeah. And he soon took the wind out of our sails that we weren't going to fly that new airplane to fight the war. He said, "Get all your personal gear out of it." And we'd say, "What happened now?" Of course, the sergeant didn't know. He probably knew, but he wouldn't say. Anyway, we got kicked out of our brand new airplane the minute we landed. And then we rode a train to our assigned, and about two of us, and I think there must have been 20 or 25 or something like guys, and crews, and so they took our new airplane away, and we rode the train, and they sent two crews to each field around in England. So I never saw my friend Don Hughes after that, and never did see him. I don't know whatever happened to him.
So from Scotland, you went down into another air base further south, or
we went to our home base that we would be flying out of, living there in England. And then we were in, if you look at the England Island, we were about halfway up and close to the west coast.
Okay.
Where we were assigned, and then we flew out of there for our missions over France and Germany.
Now, were you still in the 2nd, or were you now in the 8th Air Force over there?
We were in the 8th Air Force. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a question that, up to this point, the 8th Air Force was taking incredible losses. Were you aware of that at all going over there, and what were your thoughts?
Not that I recall. I hadn't even heard of the 8th Air Force really much. So, if anything, we were probably elated that we got signed.
Oh, okay.
The famous 8th Air Force.
Okay.
That
Okay.
we knew about. So, but we didn't see each other. I haven't ever seen Don Hughes since then.
I'll be darned.
I don't know whether he's still alive or not.
No. So okay, now you're finally at your home base, and you got your crew together.
Yeah.
Assigned? Did you get assigned an airplane then, or
Well,
how did that work out?
Well, you got a different airplane every flight.
Okay.
They'd kick you out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning, and we'd have a briefing and then a plane assignment, and we'd go out to our plane, and it'd be a different one. You never flew the same plane.
How long were you there before you flew your first mission then, roughly?
I don't remember, but not very long.
And this was, now you were there roughly the spring of '44 was when you finally got to England?
No, we were the last class to graduate and get their wings in '43.
43, okay.
Our class was 43K, and that was the last one, and that graduated in December of '43. And so we were the last bunch of that went in '43.
Okay. Talk about a typical flight. You would you said you get kicked out of bed at 4 a.m. and then what? You'd go have breakfast and then a briefing and then go out to your airplane. Can you kind of walk us through what that would be like?
Yeah, they generally about 4 o'clock in the morning. They roused everybody out that's going to fly.
Would you be aware that okay, tomorrow morning I'm flying, or would it just be?
No.
Okay.
But there was an all-out effort, so you were pretty sure you was going to.
Oh, okay.
But my little sidelight on this, we flew about five missions with our crew that was made up, and then the pilot, our first pilot, came down with pneumonia. Well, of course, the big push was on for getting France back and so forth. So they were putting everything in the air they could. So we ended up with no first pilot in our crew. So every mission we flew then would be with a different pilot. Generally, it was somebody who had his 20-some missions in and wanted to get one more so he could head home. And so, but he generally was a co-pilot for all his missions.
Mm-hmm.
And that was all right sometimes, and sometimes it wasn't. You could tell what happened to while he was flying those missions, whether he got to fly it or not. A couple of times I had to take over to get it off the ground.
Oh, geez.
They weren't trained, and of course the people running the thing, they had no idea. Well, all they could do is look at this guy, and here's a guy that's been flying co-pilot for so long, and he's about ready to go home. We'll put him on give him a crew for a couple of times, and then he can go home as a first pilot. And so we got all kinds of pilots.
Hmm.
Some of them were good, and some of them were I had to take over.
Yeah. Oh, geez.
And it really got our crew spooky.
Yeah, I'll bet.
They could see what was happening.
Huh?
So finally, generally in a bomber crew like that, the flight engineer was the top enlisted man. generally a sergeant. And so, and then the rest of the crew were generally below that man in rank. So, after we'd flown several missions, the sergeant came to me and said, our crew is getting awful spooky about these pilots that we're having to fly with. Some of them aren't really fair. And I said, oh, I know, I understand what you're saying. So I'll see what I can do about it. So then I went in, since I was top guy then.
Yeah.
In our crew and
right.
so forth. So I went in to see our CO and told him what my crew had said. They were getting awful spooky about flying with strange pilots all the time. And he was just a real nice guy and a major, and he said, well, we haven't treated your crew right. You needed a pilot and so forth. So how'd you like to, if you just take over the crew? And I said, well, I think the crew would be agreeable to that. And so he said, well, you come down tomorrow about 10 o'clock, and I'll give you a check ride, and then we'll find you a co-pilot. So at 4 o'clock the next morning, Sergeant comes and rouses me out of the sack, and I said, no, Sergeant, you're all fouled up. My crew isn't flying today. He said, I know they aren't, but you are. So I go down to the briefing, and some crew had lost their co-pilot. So I was put in with a strange crew and so forth. And we took off and flew that mission and got shot out.
Oh, no. Oh, jeez. Oh, no.
I didn't know any of the crew that I was with, and we all had to bail out.
What happened? Where were you, and what had happened?
Well, our mission was to bomb a German factory over close to Berlin.
Mm.
And we took off, and then as we went toward our target, the weather kept getting worse and worse, and finally they called off the mission. And here we are with a whole formation and loaded with bombs, and they call off the mission. Well, you couldn't land those planes with bombs.
Right.
So we were going to have to, we thought, well, we'll have to go over the channel and dump them. Well, we get, we're just following our lead plane. And so this lead plane takes off, and first thing you know, we're making a bomb run on a little airport that had 2 or 3 planes sitting on it. So we make this bomb run on this little airport, and they start shooting at us, of course. And the Frenchman laughed and said, we got shot down by a bunch of women.
Oh, so you were over France at this, heading back.
France,
okay,
yeah.
okay, uh-huh.
So we all had to bail out.
Oh, geez, I can't imagine what that must have been like. What were you thinking at the time? That must have been terrifying.
Well, a little side story, and this is I'm not trying to make a good story out of it, but I was flying observer, and
meaning
we didn't have a pilot, so and it happened this way. I don't know whether it was normal or not, but our group was supposed to lead the formation that day.
Mm-hmm.
And so our colonel at our base was flying in the lead ship as co-pilot, assisted the co-pilot. So I didn't even have a place to fly. So he said, you go back in the back and you keep me posted on the formation. You can see better back there. And so I went in the back of the plane and then didn't have anything to do, and we got where they were shooting at us. Well, they tightened up, but I just told him that, yeah, the formation's in good shape and so forth. And that's when we got hit.
So were you staring out like the gunner's window, or where were you stationed in the?
That's the rest of the story, I guess.
Yeah.
I hate to tell this because it sounds like I'm embellishing.
No.
But I was a spare back in the back. There was two waist gunners and a tail gunner back behind the bomb bay.
Mm-hmm.
And so the two waist gunners had a big window, and they opened them when we were over enemy territory. And so I was in their way, so I laid down. There was a couple of little windows down in the side of that B-24, and I laid down there, and I could peek out the side windows and roll over here and roll over there.
Gotcha. Okay.
And keep the colonel advised and so forth, and I'd stay out of the way of the gunners.
Right.
So I'm not seeing where we're going very much or anything. I could only see the other planes in the formation, but. The guys at the waist gun windows kicked me, and I was half asleep laying down there, and they pointed, and here's fire coming out of the bomb bay.
Oh, jeez.
Right,
had you guys already dropped your bombs, or did you still have your bombs?
No, we still had our bombs.
Oh.
So, and it was fire coming out. So they kicked me and got me awake, and they bailed out. They went. The time I got under my feet, well, they were gone. So I think that poor tail gunner was probably just like me, didn't know what was going on. I better go try to get him. So I started to go back to the tail to get him, and there was just fire every place.
Oh.
I just knew I couldn't make it. So I turned around and jumped out. And the rest of the story is that when I landed in a backyard of a little village, house, between the barn and the house.
But the bailout went fine. Your chute opened with no problem. Had you ever had any training in parachuting at all, or was it just here's a parachute, strap this on? And
I did a no-no. I was laying down there, and it was too uncomfortable with the leg straps on the parachute, backpack parachute. The leg straps come up here through between your legs and hooked to the side. I had unhooked those leg straps off because it's uncomfortable laying down there. Well, then when I get up on my feet and the fire is coming out, I remembered I hadn't fastened my leg straps, but it was too hot to stay.
Oh, jeez.
And so I jumped, and knowing that I hadn't fastened my leg straps, I clamped my arm down just as much as I could over that chest strap and hoped I could stay in. And this is, I'm not embellishing, I don't mean to.
Yeah.
But anyway, it pulled my arms right up to my elbows, that strap did, but it stayed there. And I rode that parachute down, hanging by my elbows in that hornets, but it was nice, cool, quiet day, and I hung on to 'em,
I'll be darned.
and until I landed in the backyard of a little village.
Did you watch your plane go down? Did you see what happened
No,
to
I
that?
couldn't see that.
Okay.
I lost it. After I got out, I couldn't. I probably was not turned the right direction.
Okay, okay.
Hanging in that
Yeah.
perilous condition, I
Oh,
didn't want to make a move.
Right.
And so, but the rest of that story is that landed in a house, and the gal, little French woman, and her little daughter come running out and gathered up my parachute, and of course I didn't understand
Right,
French,
right.
but I could understand there was a field with some growth in it that was about that high, right off next to the road, next to her house, and I could tell she meant for me to get over there. So I went over there and crawled in out of sight in that field.
But you were okay? You were uninjured from the crash or the?
No, I was just burned.
Oh, were you burnt? Oh, jeez.
Burned around.
Had your
Yeah.
goggles on and.
Yeah.
Huh.
But no, I wasn't.
But no
Wasn't,
angle spraying or anything like that.
The people in the, this is the irony of all those things, the people in the cockpit, pilot, co-pilot, and navigator, well, the navigator was up front, but bombardier. Anyway, we got hit right in that bomb base and the cockpit section. So the pilot and the co-pilot and the engineer never knew what hit them.
Wow. Which would have
Killed them instantly.
potentially would have been your fate had you not been pushed in the
Yeah,
back. There.
yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, good Lord takes care of you. So anyway, we pretty soon I went out in that field, laid down, and not long here come a guy pushing a bicycle, and I was peeking through the weeds at him, and when he got even with me, well, he looked over at me and motioned me to come. And so he knew I was there. I wasn't hiding from him. So I went over and by a sign, he said, "Follow me." And here we went, walked clear around this little village, him pushing his bike and me following. And then we got just about even on the other side. And he turned and went into the forest. And we went into just a little ways, and there was one of our crew.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
So this guy was with like the French Resistance. Is that what? Or
No, he is just like me. He bailed out,
Yeah.
and come to find out, then the Frenchman left me with him, and by sign said they'd be back and so forth. But then when I started talking to him, he was the tail gunner
Oh,
that I
good.
thought hadn't gotten out.
Oh, wonderful.
Oh yeah,
Ah.
that was good news. So then this was on a Saturday. On Sunday morning, by then they brought in all our crew that they had gathered up, and practically everybody in this little village had to come see the Yanks that got shot down on around them, and so they had a meeting and didn't tell us very much, but except to go out and get in this car. So we did, and this driver, Frenchman, got in the car, and there was 4 of us, and those cars are like a little old Volkswagen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there was 4 of us in the back, and this driver and another guy sitting in the passenger seat. And down the road we go.
Now, did you trust them enough? Did you trust that they were taking you somewhere safe, or did you worry that, hey, maybe these guys are collaborating with the
no
Germans?
Idea.
Oh boy.
And none of our four guys spoke French.
French, yeah.
And so we had no idea except that they were taking us someplace. So that was on a Sunday afternoon. And we would come to an intersection, and there'd be a German directing traffic. And here's this little old car full of people. And I thought, we'll never get through these intersections. And they were waving right on through. And we went through, I don't know how many. It seemed like a lot, but it probably wasn't. But along about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he leaves the highway. We go out through the Tules on a side road and get less and less. And finally, it's just a trail like we have here in the mountains. And he stops, and out of the woods comes a guy walking out of the woods and comes over to the car, and he said, "Hi, Yanks," and it was an Englishman. And so the driver of the car couldn't wait for us to get out of his car.
Yeah.
And get away.
Right.
And the minute we did, away he went. He did his job. So this guy turns out to be an Englishman with an English brogue and so forth. And so he said, "Follow me," and we went back in, and then he took us back to where there was a tent and 2 or 3 other guys. And so there was, by that time my eyes were getting almost swollen shut because of the burn, and so the tail gunner got burned about the same amount as I did. So we went with this guy, and as I say, they had just a tent, and come to find out that they just set this up. And these guys had been hiding out in Paris, and the underground had just arranged to set up this forest camp. So everything was fairly new, and they only had one tent with a couple of cots in it, but because I was burned and the tail gunner was burned about the same amount, well, they gave us a bed in the tent.
Were you in a lot of pain?
Not much, no.
Okay.
Not that I recall, but by morning I couldn't see anything. My eyes were completely shut. And the tail gunner, he and I were about the same shape, and neither one of us could see a damn thing. But then that Sunday afternoon, they picked us up and piled us in the car, and we drove clear down to this camp that they just started. So I'm telling you my war story.
Yeah. Oh no, please continue. This is fascinating. Yeah.
So
were you able to get when you moved to this new camp? Were you able to get medical treatment, or were you still what?
No, and the only medical treatment we got is this housewife where I lived, this backyard, rushed me in, and she had some kind of a yellowish stuff that she put on my face, and that's the only medication we had.
Oh boy!
And then, as I say, by that night, our eyes swelled. The tail gunner and we didn't see anything for. Then the next day, hardly. And but when we finally got to our destination, this guy comes out and says, "Hi, Yank." He takes us back in, and they have a tent.
Yeah.
Then we find out that these fellows had been hiding out in Paris.
Right.
And then our Secret Service and so forth had decided to set up a camp there.
So you went from that camp, and you said you moved on to a second camp. What was?
Well, they were just starting it.
Oh, okay.
They had a tent set up and a couple of cots, but we happened to be the first ones shot down that brought this. They decided to do this program,
Right.
and all the but 2 months later, well, I don't know, 3 months later, whatever it was, we had 150 in 2 camps.
So you were in this camp for 3 months?
Oh yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. We ended up with 2 camps. One, we had segregation. We couldn't live with the Englishmen. So we had Canadians and Americans over in one camp and the English over in another camp.
And this went undetected by the Germans? You never...
No, it got pretty hairy when Patton started pushing them, and they were running, you might say. We were scared to death they'd stumble onto us in there. So we put out guards at 4 corners. Most of those forests are not natural forests. They've been planted, so they're every kilometer, or I think it's kilometer, there's a road.
Okay.
It's often sections, so we could see down from a corner. We could see 2 ways down these roads, and so we had our camp inside one of these squares.
What were conditions like there as far as sleeping conditions and food, and what did you guys do to pass the time?
Oh, yeah, that was a big problem. And we got our supplies from the local people, but we'd have to go out and pack it in to our camp because they didn't want all the people know where that camp was.
Right.
So we'd go to a different farmhouse every time to pick up our supplies. So I did a lot of that because I was one of the first ones there. I got started in getting supplies, and so I didn't speak French, but by sign language you could get by pretty good. So we'd meet them, and of course as our population grew, it took more supplies and so forth, but they had it pretty well organized. They did. We didn't go hungry at all.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, were you getting word from the underground or other sources as to how the war was progressing and what?
We had a radio. Somebody brought it. I don't know where it came from, but in our little camp we had a battery radio, so we could listen at the BBC news every evening, and that's how we kept track of where the lines were and what was going on. So we ran by battery, so we didn't play music on it.
Yeah.
But we'd catch the news on British Columbia. I mean BBC.
Right.
Yeah. And so we would pretty well know where the lines were and so forth.
So was the decision to wait for the line to come to you, or was there any thought of trying to escape towards the line?
There's all kinds of rumors. So we didn't know. When we thought that first day when we took off, the French people who had helped said, "Oh, you're going to meet a plane tonight and fly back to England." Well, when we got to see this guy, British, and we went back, there was a tent set, and we said, "Now, when do we get to transportation?" And he just laughed and said, "You're here." So that's when we found out we may be permanent residents in that forest.
Wow. And then, okay, so you're in this camp for 3 months, and then what was?
Yeah, it was in, I think it was in April that got shot down, and we got out in July.
And how did that come together? How did you get?
Well, we had the radio, so we were pretty well up with what was happening, and so we found out that the Germans were patting at them on the run, and our big danger was they would stumble onto it.
Right. Yeah.
In fact, there was an old chateau, big home, all crumbled, about a half mile up from this corner of our where we were, and I and a couple guys went up and scouted around and see what was up there. Anyway, and then there at the last, a bunch of German guys apparently stumbled onto it and spent the night, and all afternoon and the night up there. We could hear them talking, and then they had some target practicing and so forth right up the road from us. And they had no idea there was a whole bunch of Yanks right down under their nose. But it all worked out all right. But then it got so the Patton had them on the run, and so we decided that by talking to the Frenchmen and so forth, there wasn't any Germans around at all. Come on out. So we all gathered out from our little camp, went out where there was open spaces and so forth, and here come all the Frenchmen from this little village. Every one of them brought some.
Wow.
And they always had a flask on their hip too.
Yeah.
So a couple of our guys, 2 or 3 of our guys, decided they weren't going to wait. They were going to head out. Near as we knew, that weren't any Germans around, and they could, if they headed west, they'd get to the coast. So they decided to take off, and I thought they were getting a little. We had it made. I thought they just, but I didn't try to talk them out of it. And so, as it turned out, they hadn't gone very far, 2 or 3 miles, when they saw this bunch of anti-tank cars. They looked like a tank, but they're not. And they, with the Americans, and they could tell it was American. So they waved them down, and then they told these guys in the tank car what was the deal was. They were Americans, and we've been hiding out, and there's a whole bunch of them back there. So this captain that was in charge of this anti-tank car got on the radio and said, send me a bunch of GI trucks, and told him where he was and so forth, and by golly, they did right. We were out there in the open above this little village, and about an hour later, here come this string of GI trucks, right through the village and right up to the hill.
Oh, it must have been a wonderful sight to see.
These 3 guys that had walked out had come across an anti-tank outfit and told them what was going on.
Yeah.
And this guy, the captain of that, got on the radio and said, send me GI trucks. So here they come. Well, they came up to the top of the hill where our group was out in the open with the Frenchmen. And the guy running one of these, the guy in charge, the captain in charge of this anti-tank group, said, where's the other camp? Well, when you stop and thought about it, most of the guys in our camp had no idea where the other camp was. We had walked from one place to the other.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
About half a dozen of it. So I said, well, I think I can find it. But I had to go by road. But I lucked out. Growing up in the mountains and so forth, I'm sure helped.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I hit it right on the nose and went right to their camp by road. And the look on those guys' face when we go cruising in their camp, it was amazing. Anyway, we told them, get ready. There'll be some trucks here pretty soon, and they trucks were right behind them, and we loaded them all up on the trucks, and went back to where we left my group over. It was about probably 2 or 3 miles, and went back there and picked all those guys up, and we loaded those guys in the trucks. Well, by that time, the French had been feeding them booze and so forth. A happy bunch of guys. We got them in the trucks, and away we went towards the coast with this anti-tank guys leading the way. And we stopped a couple of times, and there was a guy driving a truck, and they shot his truck up and so forth. But we got to the coast just at dusk. And they knew where our guys had a headquarters over there, and so I took up to dumped it out just in the cornfield or something, right up above where this little old headquarters for the guys that were over there. So,
how far do you think roughly you were from the coast? Do you think?
At that time?
Yeah, for your camp from the coast.
Oh, well, it couldn't have been very far, because it didn't take us long to get there when we got. I thought at the time, well, I've looked it up on the map too. It probably was 50 miles, maybe.
Okay.
I'm sure it wasn't more than that.
Okay.
From the coast.
All right. So that tank driver or anti-tank driver dropped you guys all off, and what happened from that point when he brought you into the camp, the new camp, or back to headquarters?
Oh, he took off, and I don't know where he went. He couldn't wait to get rid of us.
What'd you guys do then?
Well, we just well, let's see. We just stayed that night right there.
Okay.
And so the next morning, we did some inquiring. We found out that our troops were right up, not too far from where we were up the hill. So 3 of our guys decided to walk. They're going to walk to the coast. So they took off, and I didn't. I thought we were safe, and there wasn't any point in asking for trouble. But anyway, they took off, and they ran into this anti-tank guys. There was about 5 of those.
Yeah.
And so they told him what the deal was. So they came right over to get us, and they got on the phone and said, "Send it."
And they came and picked you up and then took you back to the coast and then dropped you off, and then they took off, and where did you guys just stay?
Well, we just bedded down there.
Yeah. How was your condition at that point? Medically, how were you? Physically, how were you doing?
I was burning pretty bad.
Still? You hadn't recovered from your wounds yet? Or
well, no, it was just overnight. And so the next morning, I slept down there where they had this tent, so forth, and they gave me one of their cots. And
well, what I was asking is, after you were liberated from your camp and the anti-tank guys took you back to the coast, how were you physically doing then? 3 months later, had you recovered from your wounds, or were you still
Oh no, it was,
still pretty bad?
well, yeah, because it happened. Happened so quickly that the next morning, I or the tail gunner couldn't see.
No, I know that at that point, but I'm talking now months later after you'd been in your camp. After you'd been in your camp for 3 months, were you able to recover from your wounds? Or
Oh yeah.
Okay.
He and I got to where we could see after about 2 days.
Oh, okay.
And then our eyes started opening up, and so from then on, and it's amusing when these anti-tank guys come, and our three guys have walked out
Right.
and
Yeah.
ran into,
Right. Yeah.
and they come up. The captain on the lead anti-tank said, "Where's the other camp?"
Yeah. You took him to the other camp.
And well, there was very few people in our camp that knew where the other camp was.
Right. So you took him to
bring him right in there.
and you went and got the Brits, and then came back, and then you guys everyone took off for the coast.
Yeah.
And tell us now. Continue on once you got to the coast. Continue your story there.
Well, I and a friend it was a bombardier that was on our crew. Anyway, we decided we found out there was a little air base on up about a couple miles. So we took off to go up there, and we went up there, and anyway, somebody told us where we could go to see boats down. We're kind of running back and forth. So we decided we'd go see if we could catch a ride on one of those boats, and we did.
Back across the channel to England?
Yeah. Uh-huh. So we beat all the rest of them back to London by doing that. So we went down there and where they said that these guys were flying and so forth. So we caught a ride by airplane back to London. We were the only two that did it, just because we had decided to do something. So.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got back to London ahead of our other guys, and by about a day, maybe a little more than that. But anyway, when our people back in London found out they knew they had people down there.
Right. Okay.
They knew we were there, but when we gave them a lot more detail, then but we were all in old civilian clothes, and the word came in to get those people in uniform. Eisenhower had said, "Get those people in uniform." So all the enlisted men, they come and picked them up and took them down to the PX and gave them a uniform. But the officers didn't get taken, so then we had to go find our own way to get a uniform. But Eisenhower said, "Get those people in uniform," and
so he was aware of it. It made it all the way up to that he was aware of you guys.
That's the word we got.
Wow.
Eisenhower said, "Get those guys in uniform." So we did get one free uniform. Didn't have to buy it.
And then you went back to your base, or where did you go from there then?
Well, we went back to London.
Yeah.
And we all gathered in London, and they had made arrangement with some people. So we had beds, like GI, but we had a building, there was a whole bunch of beds in it, and a little open gym, and so they were bringing all us guys in to that place, but they wouldn't let us go until we got in uniform. So the enlisted men got uniformed right away.
Yeah.
And officers took a couple days.
Yeah. Was it just nice to be back somewhere similar, back in England, back, I want to say civilization, but back to friendly territory and able to get some food, different kinds of foods,
Oh, yeah.
and a nice bed in a cozy room. I mean, that must have been very nice to have.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
It really was.
Yeah.
And they weren't prepared for as much as I had thought they would be. But they did have this place, and they did keep us there and feed us, and all. But they had. And they told us that Eisenhower said get those
Right.
in uniform. Well, they couldn't just go out. And they had to take us down, officers, down to a store and let them get it.
Right.
So I did get one full uniform free.
Yeah. Did Eisenhower ever come visit you at all? No. Let me, along these lines, we'll continue with your story here in a second. Along these lines, let's talk about the home front. Now, I'm assuming that Elsie and your folks had gotten the word that you'd been shot down. You're probably considered missing in action at that point, or?
Yeah.
And did they ever talk after the war? What they were thinking? What they were?
Well, my dad at that time was a postmaster up at little old town of Pierce.
Yeah.
And my wife was working in Greeley here, and she and my brother's wife had, my brother's wife was working for a telephone company, and Elsie was working at a Safeway store.
Okay.
But they had an apartment down here in Greeley.
Okay.
And so they stood here. But Elsie didn't have a permanent address when I gave the Army all this vital information.
Right,
So all the telegrams and so forth went to my parents.
Oh, geez.
Up in Pierce. So I sent them a telegram as soon as I got where I could, and that I was back.
But for 3 months or so, they had no idea what your status was.
No.
Did they ever?
Well, they had sent my wife and my parents a telegram that I was missing in action.
Right.
Yeah.
After the war, talking with Elsie and your folks, did they ever talk about their feelings during that time period? What they were thinking? It must have been awful.
Oh, it must have been.
Yeah.
Elsie saved the telegrams and so forth, and we dug them out the other day and looked at them. But yeah, it was tough on them too.
Yeah. Wow.
But the Air Force was real good about sending messages. Elsie got a message, a telegram, right away when I sent her a telegram when I got out to the coast, but the Army, the Air Force telegram beat mine.
Oh, did it? Yeah. Oh, good. Oh, that must have been a wonderful feeling to get that telegram.
Oh, yeah.
Telling them you were okay.
Yeah.
So where did you go after you were in that holding building and got your new uniforms and everything? Where did you go from there then?
Home.
Oh, okay. You never went back to your base. You just
never flew another mission.
Okay.
I went back to my base as soon as I got a uniform, and checked in, and had an interview with the CO, of course, and he said, "Well, of course, I'll put you through for a promotion." I said, "I appreciate that," and he did. and some sergeant, I don't remember how connected, some sergeant said, don't leave without it. You'll never catch up with you. Your promotion will never catch up. You better stay here until, because we were drawing per diem and living in a hotel in London. He said, you better stay right here until you get your orders. So, okay, I sent Elsie a telegram that we were safe, and we just living it up in a nice hotel and on an expense account. But I forgot my train of thought. But anyway, yeah, we.
Now, when you checked back into your base, was your original crew still there, or
No, they had finished. The only guy who was there was the bombardier, and the only reason he was there is when we got over there and got ready, they pulled the bombardiers out of our crews and sent them to school. So Blackwell was his name. We called him Blackie. Blackie didn't get to. He had to go to school for 2 or 3 weeks. He was in school when I got shot. When I disappeared, so he was a character too. But anyway,
so he didn't have enough missions, so he was still there. But your original crew had completed their missions,
all but Blackwell,
and completed their missions and returned to the States.
He was still trying to get his missions, so he'd be eligible to go home. But
yeah, we stopped to change the tape. We'd left off. You were now back at your base, really kind of just relaxing, living it up, waiting for your promotion. Continue your story from there.
what?
Well, where we left off when I changed the tape, you were back at your base, more or less, I think, waiting for your promotion, and you want to continue your story from there.
Okay. Well, the CO at our base was very nice. I got an interview with him and so forth, and he said, well, we'll send you home this way, and I'll send it through promotion for you too. And later, the sergeant outside said, don't leave without it,
right?
Or it'll never catch up with you.
Yeah.
So we went back to London and checked in the hotel, and we'd call out at the Air Force headquarters there in London to see if our orders had come through. And this poor fellow that was in our crew, he and I, Ken Schilling was his name, he was just sure he was going to make major. And that was a big step. And I was just a little old second lieutenant, might make first lieutenant. So, but I check every day, and one day they said, yes, your orders are here. I went out and got them, and he went along and got his, and we happened to be lucky enough. We were the first ones back, because we caught our air ride back to London. We were the first ones checking in, and so they gave me, at that time they gave me a ticket to go home, fly. So then when all these guys started coming in, they changed their ways, and they gave them boat tickets. So I and Schilling were the two lucky guys. We got to fly home, and the rest of the 4 guys had to come home by boat.
So you got your orders, and then you flew home. Where did you go when you landed back in the States? Did you have to?
We had to fly into Washington, D.C. because they wanted to interview us. Mm-hmm. The interview didn't amount to very much, but anyway, we flew into Washington, and they had made hotel arrangements for us, and we went out and checked in at the Air Force headquarters in Washington, and answered any questions they had and so forth. And then they gave us a ticket to go home. And so, but we had some sergeant told us, don't leave
Right.
without getting those promotion orders.
Had you got that promotion before you left? So you had it in hand.
That's the reason we had to wait.
And you got promoted to lieutenant?
I got him before. Yeah, I got mine, but Ken's didn't come through.
Oh no!
He thought he was going to make major, and he never did. I don't think. I saw him later out at something when we got transferred to California, but he hadn't made. He wasn't wearing his leaves yet.
Oh no! So from after your interview in Washington D.C., then you took the train home. Then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Were you just on leave, or were you at that point discharged?
Oh no, I was on leave. And
okay.
I had to report to Air Force here in Denver, and then they assigned me to someplace out in California.
Oh, okay. What was that homecoming like when you got home from Washington D.C. after all you'd been through? You remember that? You remember coming to the station and Elsie or your folks picking you up, and you remember that day when you arrived home?
I didn't see them till I got to Denver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that must have been a great homecoming.
Oh yeah. Elsie was, she was a strong gal. She did good. She was good for my folks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And my dad was very emotional, and he and I were always pretty close. So
yeah.
It was tough on him.
Yeah. I'll bet. And you're home for leave for a little bit, and then you had to report out to California.
Yeah. Then they actually mailed me orders to home, and I got sent to California.
Okay.
And we stayed in a hotel out there in Santa Monica for, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks. And then finally got an assignment to go back to work.
And what was that? What did you get assigned to then? Where did you go?
Well, I had requested to become a pilot instructor.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
And so I did get that, and I was assigned to someplace in Arizona, but I can't remember.
Yeah, that's okay. Fine. And how long were you there before? Is that where you finished out your service then, or?
No, it was strange. I was instructing in single engine because it's a lot more fun.
Oh, okay.
So I was able to wrangle and instruct. So I went through instructor school down in San Antonio, and then I got assigned to someplace in Arizona. Anyway, and I instructed cadets in advanced single engine training. And that was a lot of fun. Go out, ring out the plane, do aerobatics for a half day, and then go back home. That was a good assignment.
Yeah. And how long were you down there then, approximately?
Well, we were down there, and I was down there for 6 or 8 months. Then I got orders to go to California, and sure enough, when I got to California, I found out that they were going to send us to the Pacific.
Even after everything you'd been through, they...
Oh yeah, they're going to put us back to work.
Oh boy.
And then the war ended, and I came home.
I'll be darned.
But I was on my way to go to the South Pacific for fly some more missions.
Oh, geez. Do you remember where you were when you'd heard we had dropped the atomic bomb and then the war was over? Do you remember?
Yeah, we were in Santa Monica.
Did you have any idea, any concept what this bomb was about that they talked about?
No.
Yeah.
Really had no idea what it was. No, there hadn't been any hint of anything like that. All I knew is what we heard on the radio.
Yeah, yeah. When you were being sent over, were you going to be sent over once again as a bomber pilot or a single engine pilot? Did you have orders in that regard yet?
No, I didn't. I spent several months instructing.
Yeah.
In advanced single engine, and that was fun.
Yeah,
I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
But they were getting ready to put me back flying
Bombers again. Okay. All right.
in the Pacific. So I was en route, you might say.
Yeah. Wow.
I was temporarily attached to an air base out there, and
so then, how much longer were you in the service after the war ended? How much longer did you have to serve before you were finally now discharged and could come home?
I'd have to look it up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed teaching.
Yeah.
The single engine. These were kids that had been in the last class.
Yeah. Okay.
The last step before they put on the wing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my job was teach them aerobatics. So all I do was go out and ring out the airplane and show them. That was fun.
Let me back up and ask you some questions with your service over in Europe. How many missions altogether did you fly before you were shot down?
15.
15?
Yeah.
And what would go through your mind, and I guess as you prepared for a mission, and you were in the mission with, I don't know if you were being flak and the thick of the mission, and then when you finally came back from a mission, how would you, I guess, decompress from something like that? Can you talk us through each step? I mean, what would go through your mind as you're heading into harm's way? Did you think about that, or were you just flew? Or
I don't think we knew from the beginning. That's the reason you joined.
Yeah.
You fly a combat plane of some kind.
Yeah.
And disappointed when I didn't get single engine.
Right. Yeah.
And got these big old bombers.
Yeah. But I mean, as you take off from England and you're on your way to a mission, did you think about what you were going into? Did fear or anything play into that, or did you?
Oh, I suppose you did.
Yeah.
I don't recall. It seems to me as trying to recall back that nobody got, were nervous.
Yeah.
Some guy, our tail gunner, for instance, he was nervous and he was afraid all the time. So it did affect some.
Yeah. How about after a mission was done, you're landed and you're either eating or you're going to bed that night and you're caught when you can finally, all the adrenaline's gone, and did you ever think about the mission, or was it hard to decompress from the mission, or was it just?
Well, we had to be interviewed as soon as we got back, and that went in of what happened on the mission.
Okay.
But
did they ever get easier for you, or was everyone just as? I mean, did you ever get used to flying them, or was
it was just that's what we're here for?
Huh. Wow.
I think that's the way most of our people felt.
Now, what was it like here? Here's a boy from small town Pierce, over in England and on the East Coast, and was it obviously new experiences for you? Was it, did you have leave to go into London and see the sights? And
oh yes.
It must have been something, like I said, for a small town boy from Pierce to experience that kind of stuff.
However, I had spent some time quite a bit of time away from home.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, okay.
Before this all happened.
So you were probably better adjusted than a lot of the guys.
Yeah, I probably was.
Yeah.
Because I worked for a couple of years
out in California.
Aircraft factory.
Yeah. Yeah. So how? Now you're. We'll move ahead again. Now you're discharged and you come home. What did you do? Tell a little story, your post-war experience, what you did after that, and a little bit about your life after the war.
Well, I had gone to, when I got out of high school, I wanted to, I knew I couldn't go to college because we couldn't afford it. But I went to a business school.
Right,
And so I went, when I got back and was a civilian, I went looking for a bookkeeping job because it had some bookkeeping training.
Okay.
And so my dad had, luckily, he had bought a brand new Chevrolet just before the war. So he had this nice Chevrolet car, and he had become pretty good friends with Mr. Edwards down there, Edwards Chevrolet, remember?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he and Mr. Edwards had become friends, so when Dad would be coming to town, well, he'd stop in and see Mr. Edwards. So when I came down with him one day, after I got back, and he took me in to meet Mr. Edwards, he'd become friends with him, and tell him that they'd probably talked about me and so forth. And so Mr. Edwards said, well, what are you doing to do now? And I said, well, I'm looking for a job. And he said, what kind of job? And I said, well, I'm looking for a bookkeeping job. I went to bookkeeping school, business school. He said, you ought to go over to see Paul Good over at the gas company. I was talking to him the other day, and he's looking for somebody just about like you.
Huh.
And I'd never heard of him or the gas company. I didn't even know what natural gas was. So I went over like he told me to, and I introduced myself and told him Mr. Edwards had told me to come and see you, and that you might have an opening for a bookkeeper, and I did go to business school and so forth. So Paul said, fine, thank you, he treated me nice. So I didn't hear any more from him, so I went on for a couple of weeks, and I told Elsie, I got to find a job. So we loaded up the car and headed I was going to go to Denver and look for a job. And I went through Greeley, and I said, maybe I ought to stop and see that guy over at the gas company I talked to the other day before I go on, and having no idea that he had to call me. So I walked in the gas company down here, and Paul recognized me immediately, and he said, I was just going to call you. And so we went into his office, and he hired me.
Is that right?
So I went to work he said, take a week and go fishing, and then start the first of the month and so forth. So I did, and I went to work for the gas company, and I worked until I retired.
Is that right?
Only job I ever had was with the same company.
I'll be darned.
I worked there in Greeley as a bookkeeper for 10 years, and then we bought the Canyon City Gas Company down in Canyon City. So I went down there as manager of it, and we lived down there for, I think, about 20 years. And then I came back and when the guy, Paul Good, that hired me, retired, I came back and took his place. So I had 7 years back here in Greeley as manager here.
I'll be darned. Well, we'll start to wind down this interview a little bit. I'll just ask a few more questions, and then we'll wind her down.
Ask any question you might.
Yeah. After the war, did you ever keep in touch with either your crew or the guys you spent in that camp in France. Did you guys ever keep in touch or have any sort of reunions or anything like that?
No. I've thought about that a lot. We had one guy that there's always a guy that's a doer and tried to get us organized into a association and so forth, but it never did work out very good. So
yeah. Have you ever had a chance to travel back to any of the places you'd say England or to where that camp was in France? Did you ever get a chance to?
Yeah, I next time we went back to England and France, I was going to go right out there where that camp was. Couldn't find it. Nobody knew anything about it.
Is that right? Huh.
I couldn't find anybody that knew anything about it.
Huh.
And I know I was close to it, but nobody remembered.
Is that? Oh, that's too bad. Huh.
Yeah.
Had things changed quite a bit from what you had seen there in France? When you went back, had things changed quite a bit?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about, or any stories that you can think of now that you want to add to this before we would close down the interview? Any stories, anything that you forgot to talk about that you'd like to talk about now, or anything?
Well,
or did we cover everything?
Okay. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions, or if there's something you'd like me to.
Well, certainly there's a couple things I always like to close off with. My last question usually is to ask you, how do you think that period of your life affected your life, played into your life, changed your life, or did it? Obviously, I think it must have, but how do you think that period of life played into your entire life?
I don't think it did very much.
Really? Yeah.
I really don't. I didn't have a bad time. I was lucky enough to avoid capture and didn't have to go through all that. And so I really don't believe that it had a great deal of effect on me. I'm sure it did on some of our people while we were in camping out in the woods. Some of them you had to handle pretty carefully. But most of them, I was really actually surprised. Most of them were very, very strong, and they weren't scared. They were very practical, and we had quite a few people living together in that camp.
Now, did you guys try to keep somewhat of a military semblance in it? Did you have order? I mean, you must have been, as an officer and one of the first ones there, probably, were you one of the leaders of that camp? Or?
Well, sort of, but it sort of, those things seem to work themselves out.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. We had a tent that, we had a couple of majors, a captain, and a couple of sergeants, and me. I was a second lieutenant at that time.
But was there any sort of did you keep the military hierarchy there, or did
No.
everybody just kind of just work together?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, rank didn't
Okay.
much enter into it, although it did to some degree. I don't know how to say. My closest friends that I made during that time were officers, pilots or navigators or bombardiers.
But you would interact with each other. It wasn't
Yeah.
the enlisted didn't stay away from the officers like you normally would on a base.
No.
Okay.
The fact is, in our tent, we had a little old guy from Boston, and he had a Boston accent, and he was just funnier than he kept us in stitches half the time. just a little old guy, and I think his rank was corporal. and he happened to be in our tent, and he just kept us entertained all the time. He had a wonderful sense of humor.
Well, the last thing I always like to do as I close down an interview is ask you if there's any sort of statement you would like to make to anybody who will watch this tape to kind of close off the tape. If you had anything really into the moon that you wanted to say, if there was anything you wanted to say.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Be glad to help any way I can.
Okay. Well, Burl, I want to thank you for your time to sit down and tell your story today. More importantly, though, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can you describe this telegram that you received here, Elsie? Can you tell us about it?
Oh, I'm supposed to say something about it?
This is the telegram you received that Burl was missing in action.
Yes.
Do you remember?
It was sent to Burl's folks because they didn't have my address here in Greeley. So it went to his folks. But they let me know right away. They sent 2 people down to the apartment where I worked.
Do you remember what you were thinking when you received that? What your thoughts were?
Oh, it was terrible.
Oh, boy.
Just the unknowing is very, very hard to live with.
And that was, you had to put up with that for like 3 months or
Yes,
so.
almost 3 months.
Oh, boy. These are the telegrams that you received back, or well, it looks like Burl's father received. Well, one's from Burl. It says, "All is well and safe. Please don't worry." And the other one looks like it's from the Air Force saying, "Pleased to inform you your son, Second Lieutenant Burl Huitt, returned to duty."
Yes.
That must have been a wonderful, when you got that.
Oh, yeah. That was really. Now let's see.
You said, here is the article that appeared in the Tribune
Yes.
stating that he was missing in action.
Yes.
And you said, here is the program when he got his wings from Lubbock, Texas, correct?
Yes, this is a little book, and that was also from Lubbock, Texas. It's here.
It is.
I had it. Else, I don't know if I can.